Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today it's time to talk about another Patron question, and this one is about other ideas for other subtrees. Obviously, with the addition of South Africa being in the game, it is quite an interesting time for War Thunder. It means that a bunch of other nations can be added into the game, and at least for me, when it comes to other nations which may not have as many vehicles, it now gives them an opportunity to be able to add it. And in this video, we're going to go over one of them. Now, this question comes in from Conte Baraka, basically talking about what other ideas would you like to see when it comes to subtrees, or what other possibilities are there when it comes to other nations. And the one we're going to focus on in this video is Romania. And the reason is because they would be a wonderful addition to either Italy or Germany. Now, I'm going to focus on them being added to Italy right now. The reason is Italy was an Axis power at the time of the Second World War. At the same time, some of the most recent additions to the game have indicated that that Romania would stick much better into Italy instead of Germany. So let's go through the three major reasons why I think Romania will eventually come to the Italian tech tree in the form of a ground force. The first one obviously being that the sub-tech tree idea has been tried, tested, and also implemented. The South Africans being here means that now the idea is here, it is ready to go, and also I would say pretty successful, meaning that when we look at other nations such as Romania, it should definitely be seen that it can be added to them as well. The second factor is because of update Ixwa Strike, the Italians have actually got added 3 vehicles to them, which are of German descent if you just look at it, you know, without really thinking. Obviously, it's very obvious that the Stug, the Panzer, and also the other vehicle which was added for them, which was of course the 2 Panzers, so the Panzer 3N, the Panzer 4G, and the Stug 3G, you may just look at these and think, well, of course, you know, they're just German vehicles which the Italians used. But another way you can also look at it is these vehicles were also used by Romania. Romania actually used Panzer 3 Aus Ends in 1942. They also used a bunch of different variants of the Panzer IVs. They used the F, the G, the H, and the J. And also, the Germans delivered 108 Stug 3 Aus Gs to the Romanians as well. So with those 3 additions to the Italian tech tree, they could easily be moved over into a Romanian tech tree, which would be a subtree in the Italian lines. So that also would give us an indication that maybe this comes in the future. The other thing to also think of when we talk about Romania is a bunch of vehicles have already been added to the Italians which are of Romanian descent. The first one, of course, being the IAR 81C. You also have a bunch of other Romanian premiums such as the BF 109, the Duck that is also there, also has some roots in Romania. So for me, because of the fact that they've added a bunch of Romanian vehicles already to Italy, it would indicate that in the future Italy will also get some more Romanian vehicles. So those are the 3 major factors. Now let's get into some of the other vehicles that could easily be added into this Romanian tech tree, not just from rank 1, but all the way up to rank 7. So with the Panzer 3s, Panzer 4s, and Stug 3s probably making up the majority of rank 2 and 3 for this Romanian subtree, we have to have a look at rank 1. Now, rank 1 for Romania would be kind of interesting. They obviously have access to stuff like the Renault R35, but if I'm honest with you, my experiences with the French tree were very negative, so I'd rather not that be the starter vehicle for the Romanian tech tree. Just like how for the South African you have the Sarks, which are incredibly fun to play, I would also like to add some stuff for the Romanians, which would be pretty fun as well. So what I would actually go for is the Vânătorul de Care R35. This is an R35 which replaces the stub gun with a Russian 45mm gun. This was obviously created in 1944. It was designed as kind of a tank hunter idea and generally didn't really go anywhere because of obviously where the war went, but this is basically a R35 with the Soviet 45, which you would see on something like a BT from early war. So this would be mixing some ideas from rank 1 Soviets and rank 1 French and creating a really interesting vehicle, which would have a lot of firepower, not too much speed, but decent armor, and also a pretty small silhouette. You could also add the T-38, which is the wartime designation of the Panzer 38Ts, which were delivered from the German army in 1943. These were given to Romania by Germany to basically replace the losses that they'd had earlier in their campaigns. Earlier, they actually used a lot of Skoda LTs, which are obviously of Czechoslovakian descent, so when we talk about Czechoslovakia, I'll make sure to bring them up. But with these, they actually served from 1943 all the way into 1944. They weren't terribly effective, but they did the job well, serving with many different tank battalions, basically the 2nd Tank Regiment and also the 54th Company, which was attached to stuff such as Cavalry Corps, which were used in Kuban and also the Crimean area. This would be another German descent tank, which could definitely be in the Romanian tech tree, which could bolster the Italian one. The next vehicle is the TACAM T60. And this idea was born out of a thought that the Romanians needed a vehicle which would have the similar abilities to a T-34. Obviously, the Romanians, mainly fighting the Soviets in World War II, they needed comparable equipment. So therefore, they took two pre-existing ideas and married them together. The first one being the T-60 light tank. Obviously, the chassis of it, and they removed the turret and used the hull as a base for this tank destroyer, and also they had some other guns, the F-22 76mm. So basically what they've taken here is the Soviet T-60 light tank and added the Soviet F-22 76mm there, and they had both of these in abundance. They had 175 captured T-60s and a ton of these guns, so they married them together and then put some extra armor on it, on the superstructure, and also they used the GAZ-202 engines to move the vehicle around. The vehicle itself was actually pretty useful. It was of lower profile and also pretty fast, but the problem was it came at a point where it couldn't exactly turn the war for Romania. Overall, in War Thunder, this would actually be a really fun machine. You know, a very small profile machine with access to a 76mm, kind of like the ZIS-30 in the Soviet tech tree, but maybe a little bit slower and a little bit lower. You also had another design which was very similar to it, at least in idea. So you had the TACAM R2. Now the TACAM R2 is taking the LTVZ-35, which we talked about before, the Czech tank, and actually giving it more of a purpose. The problem with the Skoda LT was that it was used in 1942, and by the time of 1942 they found real issues not just against armor of the Soviets, which were coming at them, but also stuff such as anti-tank rifles. They were tearing the Skodas apart, and therefore the Romanians actually suffered heavy losses while using them. So they went back to the drawing board, took these Skodas and went, okay, how do we improve this? And this is where the TACAM R2 comes from. What they did is they removed the turret of the Skoda, the LTVZ-35. They kept the chassis, they kept the engine, and also the tracks and suspension and all of that good stuff, and built a superstructure on top and housed a 76.2mm ZIS-3 artillery piece. This was seen as something which could double well as a howitzer, but also as a direct fire anti-tank gun, since it did have a good enough muzzle velocity to be effective against armor even in June 1944, which is when this thing and also the T-60 TACAM were being made. So overall, you have once again a vehicle which is very similar to what stuff like the Germans would do, where they would capture vehicles or they would use imported vehicles and try and build superstructures on them, which would either create artillery pieces or anti-tank machines. The Germans were very famous for doing them with a lot of French vehicles, which they captured after the invasion of France, and the Romanians tried as well to give it a go. The next one is the Mareșal tank destroyer, and this is a very similar idea to what you find from the German Hetzer, apart from this machine was built and produced and designed from 1942 to 1943. Unfortunately, it never got past the prototype stage. There was actually around about maybe 10 or 12 of them built, or maybe about 7 of them. It's kind of hard to tell. Some of them obviously were partially built. Some definitely were built. The prototypes themselves were built, which is very, very important. So therefore, it can be put into War Thunder. But what you're looking at here is a very low profile, non-turreted tank destroyer, very similar to the Hetzer, if not slightly worse. There was a bunch of different design ideas which were made for this vehicle, all based around the T-60 chassis. There was even initial tests done adding a 122mm to the T-60 chassis to try and create this thing, but obviously that wasn't great. The idea also was to create some armor on it of about 20 to 30mm thick, which would be still light so the machine could move around, but would also be effective thickness against the Soviet 76mm, which was obviously the main gun on the T-34 at the time. Now, even though they ran into a bunch of issues with this thing, they still were able to produce it in a decent amount, and it was supposed to be adopted into production, but unfortunately, obviously with the war where it was, it didn't exactly get there. The machine itself was supposed to use the 75mm Romanian AT gun, the DTUDR number 26. It was also going to use a Hotchkiss engine. There was 1,000 of them ordered from France, but unfortunately never really happened. You know, the H39 engine and gearbox were French. The tracks used on this machine were Czech, and the optics and radios on it were German, which is kind of interesting. 1,000 of these were actually ordered in May 1944 by the High Command, but due to Allied bombings, the first series was delayed until November 44, and because of that, there was actually a binational joint production program with the Hetzer set up instead, so people would make that instead of this vehicle. And other tests were still performed until August 44, when the armistice led to the cancellation of the project, and then everything was confiscated by the Soviets, obviously with the Romanians being out of the war. So this is a machine which I think is actually really interesting. You know, it would be really fun to play in the game. It would be light, it would be maneuverable, it'd have a small crew, it'd have a 75mm. It would just be one of those vehicles which would be great to see on the battlefield, and also would have access to a machine gun as well. This is the end of the first portion of the Romanian tanks. In part 2, we'll have a look at post-World War II machines, but I just wanted to, in this video, cover the World War II stuff because they have so many interesting designs and also shows how much potential the Romanians have. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Teddy, John Ryman, Universe, Conte Baraka, Trigger Hippie, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Hosest Kishore, Hans, Barine, and Samuel Schlick for supporting the channel.